just ridiculed him day after day after day.
Piedmont Judicial Circuit District Attorney Brad Smith spoke about the decision to bring charges against the 14-year-old's father, Colin Gray.
The U.S. Surgeon General cites a recent study that found that 51% of 14 to 17-year-olds in the United States worry about school shootings.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't breathe. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. At least that's what we are trying to be, and we are trying to be smart, and we are trying to be self-aware and just inculcate a sense of critical thinking. And we're going to be doing that in this analysis. 4 people were murdered by a 14-year-old at APALACHEE High School. That puts Colt Gray, in a really sobering sense, in the same league as serial killer Rex Heuermann, at least in terms of the victims that he's been officially charged with. But also think about the Idaho 4 quadruple murder suspect Brian Koberger, and then family annihilator Chris Watts. And so, in a word, what is the defining trait of criminals with high body counts like these? Well, sadism. Now, although the U.S. Secret Service analysis that we referenced in the previous analysis on Colt Gray does make use of the word sadism, it only does so fleetingly, even though it acknowledges that sadism is often a primary or secondary motive in cases like these. So let's get down to it. What is the mechanism we're dealing with here? Not just with Colt Gray, but all of these types of crimes. Thomas Crooks, Adam Lanza, Stephen Paddock, but then also Rex Heuermann. I mean, possibly that case is still sub judice. Brian Koberger, same deal there. And then also Chris Watts. What is the psychological mechanism, and even to some extent the psychological profile we are dealing with here? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the many of you who have subscribed. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button. If you've never hit the thanks button, please do, and let's get started. So what is the link between sadism and bullying? Well, what is happening in every bullying situation? The bully is trying to achieve an expanded sense of himself. He or she is trying to expand his influence over others. And to do that, he or she seems to operate on a very simple but also very transactional basis. It's also a very tried and tested formula in society, human and animal societies. In order for me to expand, you have to contract. In order for me to win, you have to lose. In order for me to gain or grow, you need to decrease. You have to shrink or diminish.
I will diminish and go into the West.
Now, just a quick note. I saw a couple of comments with people saying they don't appreciate these sort of sound clips and things going on. They think it's very light-hearted, but the idea of it is actually to wake you up, to sort of get you out of just listening to my voice and to sort of be kind of self-aware. So there's actually a method to this madness. And so this simple equation isn't very democratic or fair, but it is a natural impulse that is very well understood by all living things, which is, in a sense, it shows us that there's a natural sadism to simply being alive and to ordinary existence. In order for me to live, something else must die. Something else must pay the price. And even in a very basic sense, when parents have children, those parents must pay the price. They must literally pay expenses in order for these children to thrive. And the more they thrive, the more money needs to be spent in that sense. So it's kind of a very well-established equation. And so when it's applied to the high school setting, it may seem normal and natural as well. this idea of, in order for me to gain power, someone else must lose theirs. In order to show I am powerful, I need to take the power from the weak. And it's really interesting in the movie Pulp Fiction, this formula is expressed really explicitly by a man holding a gun and saying,
"The truth is, you're the weak, and I am the tyranny of evil men."
It's true that throughout human history, might equals right, and wealth has tended to follow power. Think about that. Wealth in the past tended to follow power. If you were a king, you were powerful and therefore rich. But modern society is quite different. Now power follows wealth. Now wealth can be achieved through honest work and effort and things like education and just grafting. And most try to pursue this path. But there's still a lingering temptation, perhaps even an artifact from the past, that if you can't earn your way to power, or if you're too lazy to do that, or if for whatever reason you just feel you're not going to do that or you can't do it, well then don't you simply just take it? You can just cheat your way out of it and then you just go back to might equals right. And this is also true within the school community and beyond. You know, it's true in marriages, in work cultures, in all communities, because what is undeniable is that we are all engaged in a kind of power struggle and we are all competing for power, even if we aren't. Even if we aren't actively in some kind of competition, well, someone is benefiting from someone else giving up their power. And that brings us to the central epiphany in the book that I wrote called Slaughter. And so I have to start off by saying I disagree with the assessment by the Secret Service that there is no profile for these sorts of people, right? That's something that is published and asserted in their report. There's no profile for a student attacker, nor is there a profile for the type of school. Well, that's fair. But profiling tends to focus on fixed, rigid variables. And because of this, the profiling seems to not work. But you shouldn't be thinking in terms of this sort of crime within the confines of age, gender, or race. Instead, you should be thinking of psychology, a psychological profile. And the Secret Service analysis guesses right in the next section, saying that grievances are a key to the psychology. They say attackers usually have multiple motives, and the most common involves a grievance with classmates. That is a common psychology, it's a common psychological profile. But where does that come from? And so it's quite unfortunate that they are unable to bring the two together and see it as a psychological profile. And it's not a difficult thing to measure or identify. You know, are we dealing with an individual who has suffered an unusual amount of humiliation? In the clip that I played right at the beginning, the word humiliation is not used. Instead, another word is used. Can you remember what that word was?
The father discussing bullying, telling law enforcement Colt was, quote, ridiculed, just ridiculed him day after day after day.
Now, it's not a difficult thing to measure or identify. Are we dealing with an individual who has suffered an unusual amount of humiliation and as a result is emerging as the undisputed champion of humiliation? Are we dealing with someone who's the undisputed loser of a particular class or group? Yes, we are. Now, the Secret Service might not be able to identify such individuals, but I can promise you, classmates can, teachers can. They would be able to tell you in a second who is at the top of the social pile at any point in time and who's at the bottom. And thanks to sadism and thanks to just how explicitly this transactionality is enforced in a social sense, it's always absolutely clear. I mean, that is the point of it. So much for the vaunted mystery around profiling these attackers. And so it's interesting that in their report, they acknowledge there's more work to be done. Yes, there is. But the psychological path isn't hard to find. It's ridiculously easy. And what is it? It's anal sadistic. That's the psychological path. That's the psychology. That's the psychological equation. And what's more, it's always anal sadistic. And if you're thinking, wow, that's interesting, it's got to do with these shooters, right? No, it's actually ever present. A lot of true crime is anal. Think about true crime analysis. True crime can be very anal as well. People taking joy in blaming and basically identifying perpetrators and pointing the finger and saying guilty, 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 on and on and on. It's a kind of anal sadism as well. And if it's only that is very worrying. But if there's some analysis and then at the end you synthesize some affirming response, well, that's a little bit different. And that's certainly what we try to do on this channel. And that was the central epiphany I stumbled on when psychologically profiling shooters in my book Slaughter, this anal sadism. I discovered that it's not only applicable in some of the most heinous crimes, but in ordinary crimes as well, and in ordinary society.
I know what you're thinking.
What is anality? Well, think about an infant. What goes into a child's body, whether as a baby or a toddler, is or was once alive, starting with warm, nourishing mother's milk, then fruit purees, and finally proper foods, carbohydrates, proteins, fiber, and all the rest. But originally, a maize plant growing in a crop, in dirt, blowing in the wind, baking in the sun, occasionally drenched in thunderstorms and rain, but alive. That was, if you're eating, whether it's breakfast or bread or whatever it is, in terms of perhaps carbohydrates, it started off as a plant growing in the sun, something alive. And in terms of other foods, animals, chickens, fish, pigs, lamb, cattle. But then what comes out on the other end? Feces. And what comes out on the other end is dead. Ernest Becker reminds us that the first psychological challenge a human infant faces is mastery over feces. That's something physical, that's something tangible. And this is what his parents demand as well. And this is what society demands as well. We become acceptable members of society at a very basic level when we're able to master our own feces. And if you think about it, pets are the same, or certainly in certain homes. Puppies need to be potty trained. Cats need to find their litter boxes, right? That sort of thing. Now, it may seem as if we graduate from this stage never to look back. This is the anal stage. And we'll never encounter it again, except we do encounter it again, but in a different way. Now, we can all agree on this phase, and what feces are when it comes to small children. But what is anal when it comes to adults? What is anal when it comes to kids at school? Well, when it comes to kids at school, what is anal is being, certainly if you're the recipient of it, is being bullied constantly into a kind of cowering submission where you don't dare look up, you don't dare say anything, you don't dare try to make friends, you don't dare do anything, you just dare not do anything, right? Also, if the bully is constantly bullying, that is also anal because there's so many other things one can do when you're in high school. You can learn, you can grow, you can make friends, you can learn all these different things, right? So when your life becomes one tiny little area, one tiny little pathway, that tends to be quite anal. Now, another area you might say, taxes are anal, while another person would say, well, I make a living out of doing them and my life's great. So what is anal to you is not anal to somebody else. The reality of it is what it feels like. If it feels like feces, in a psychological sense, then it is anal. So a casual definition for what we're talking about here is really any activity that is like feces, that is like not living. Think about a person who's being bullied. Are they living? In popular parlance, this might be a dysfunctional addiction. Something that is originally good for us can become twisted into something that is toxic and poisonous, like feces. Some people become addicted to food. Food started off good and healthy. Now it's not anymore. Others to alcohol. Alcohol might be something you enjoy and you have a good social interactions, and then it leads to something not so good. Also, addictions to drugs or porn or sex. That addiction is a form of anality. It's not being alive. It's no longer living. And if it gets out of hand, it can actually kill you. Work can also be anal, like any work. Obsessing over clothes or views or money can be anal. Anything and everything that takes us out of the experience of living is anal. Spending all your time thinking about true crime, thinking about other people's lives, without really living your own, without experiencing your own life, that is also anal. So in the same sense that a baby needs to stop playing with its feces and also not be controlled by feces, adults need to contain their interest in psychological feces and not allow themselves to be overwhelmed either. Okay, so what happens when anality does take over? Well, sadism is a continuum. Sadism doesn't just exist randomly. You aren't born a sadist. It germinates. And it can only germinate if it is fed, if it's nourished, if there's repeated scenarios. And think about what Colt Gray's father said about the bullying. Did it happen one day? Or was it more sadistic?
Ridiculed him day after day after day.
And anality does tend to be day after day after day. And in order for sadism to emerge out of that, it's something that is happening day after day after day, not living day after day after day. So sadism exists in a continuum, and so the more sadism you have, the more underlying anality exists. More anal, more sadistic. Want to create less sadism in people? Sort out their anality. Don't make it day after day after day.
Which brings us at last to the moment of truth.
The link between sadism and bullying is this. Bullies are sadists. A bully in the school or classroom setting is benefiting at the expense of others. The result is he turns his victim into an anal person. He shuts them down. He criticizes, humiliates, mocks, and amuses himself at someone else's expense. You might think none of that is really injuring that person. They're not getting physically hurt. Well, they are getting psychologically hurt. Words are like symbolic arrows. It is something that is symbolically impinging on that person's status. It's very real. It is something that you can experience even though it's intangible. And so this makes the bullied victim feel increasingly caged within himself. And that cage seems to get smaller and smaller. And it expresses itself as a loss of confidence, a loss of influence, and increasingly silence and apathy, and even things like depression. There's a loss of self-esteem. There's a loss, besides of social status, of agency, and the transaction that's taking place is the agency of the bully is increasing and the agency of the bullied is decreasing. And so is a bullied person living his best life? Quite the opposite. And so think about what is going on here is someone is thinking, how do I turn the tables on being bullied? I don't want to be bullied anymore. And so how can I get back to where I want to be? I don't want to be dominated. How can I maybe dominate? So Colt Gray seemed to enjoy shooting animals as a way to feel happy. He's bullied at school. Life at home is horrible as well. But he gets a sense of power by shooting animals. He's becoming a bully himself. He's learned the same lesson of transactionality. And then the more he gets bullied day after day after day, he starts wondering, couldn't I use the system that I've got shooting animals in this other setting? It's cheating, but I don't really have the tools, the charisma, the social power to do it in that sense. So is there another way that I could do it? If I can't earn power, I'm going to have to steal it. I think I'm going to have to take it away by force. That is the twisted thinking that arises. Obviously, when people like this are at rock bottom, and that's why one's got to identify who is at the bottom of the pile and what is happening to them day after day after day. And can someone stop that? Can someone recognize it? Can someone change their behavior? Well, of course they can. And that brings us to the next section. All crimes and criminals are sadistic. Think about Scott Peterson's crime. Think about what our definition is of being anal. It's when you are not dealing with the experience of life, you are dealing with the denial of the experience of life. And what does Scott do? He doesn't want his own child. He wants to deny the existence of his own child. That is anal. He doesn't want life, so he kills life. Chris Watts did the same. And so what is the anal component in those cases? And it goes much further than that. You know, these men are feeling like these babies are going to destroy their lives, are going to destroy their freedom, are going to destroy the little bit of power and income and agency that they have is going to be taken away from them. So that's how they are interpreting that. And so if you do say, okay, well, tell me more, what is the anal component in these cases? Rex Heuermann, Brian Koberger, Thomas Crumley. It's a difficult question to answer, and these individuals could probably answer it better than I could, because they could tell you, this is what's been killing me. And invariably, especially with Scott Peterson and Chris Watts, it was probably debt, not having money in both Scott Peterson's and Chris Watts' case. Not having money is like being in a cage. Not having money feels like you're being bullied in a way by the world. Not having money, you feel powerless, and that one is losing one's influence. Also, one's capacities in terms of how society sees you is also diminished. You know, if you don't have very money, you're not seen as an eligible bachelor or as an eligible mate. And so sex is a way men can feel powerful, but not if their wives are carrying something that will further impoverish or undermine and weaken them. The next section, we are all sadists. It's easy to look at criminals and imagine that we are nothing like them and that we aren't capable of their crimes, but we are. We are all sadists. In most of us, it's mild, thank goodness, but it is present. And it sometimes expresses itself when we watch sport or when we are at family reunions or after some time apart, we encounter our exes again. And that's the area we need to be self-aware, is look at your sadism. Is that increasing? Is it fluctuating, or is it stable? And then also look at your anality. How happy are you in your life? Are you having the experience of life regularly? Or are you more regularly not having an experience of being alive? And that brings us to, what is the opposite of anality? Well, if being anal means allowing ourselves to die and to be obsessed with non-living things, you know, if that can make us sadists and really bad ones, what's the alternative? Well, here it is. Balance, living right, having a healthy body, mind, and spirit. Instead of eating psychological feces, be inspired, be lifted up by nourishing spiritual and psychological food. Read good books, walk in nature, be with people who are fit and healthy and live well. What if you're in a school situation and you can't get out of that situation? You've got to try and deal with it in some way. Either change the situation, change yourself, change your response to it, get yourself out of that situation or deal with that situation, perhaps even just to the sense of this isn't going to last forever, or find other ways to deal with it. Sport, that's definitely something Colt could have done. So instead of eating psychological feces, find a way to healthy food, healthy living. You know, live well, exercise self-awareness, exercise self-discipline, rediscover self-esteem, but not by cheating your way out of it, but by earning it. Does that make sense? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.